Hi everyone, my name's Phil and I'm with the Soundproofing store, and we're here today in the beautiful Holmfirth in Yorkshire, and we're here to film the real-life step-by-step installation of one of our soundproofing systems. Today we're installing the independent ReductoClip system, which is our highest performing system. And just to talk you through, basically we've already nipped down and had a little chat with the owner of the property, and just to explain what's going on, he's got noise from the next door coming through the party wall. It's not excessive noise, it's not antisocial neighbours or anything that extreme, but it's just an old property and noise is coming through very easily. It's general day-to-day household noise like conversation, TV noise, and a lot of impact sounds. So people walking up and down the stairs, light switches flicking on and off, and that's why we're going with our highest performing system today to really make a big difference. So what we're going to do is we're going to head back down, we're going to film the full installation of the system for you so you can see step by step what's going on, and then we'll have a little catch up at the end and show you the results. Okay, so we're inside Alan's lounge. This is our party wall that he shares with the neighbour next door. And like with a lot of older properties, as you can see, we've got two alcoves either side of a chimney breast, a very large chimney breast in this case. Now, because of space restrictions, Alan's decided not to do anything inside of the fireplace because there's a wood burning stove in there, and we're not doing anything with the chimney breast itself. We've had a little listen to the noise next door, and although we can hear a bit of sound coming out of the back of the fireplace, the majority is through the two alcoves, so that's where we're going to address today. Now, the chimney breast is quite deep, which gives us lots of space, and generally listening to the sound, the wall is doing a pretty good job at blocking out the higher pitched sounds, but not the lower pitched sounds. So we need a system that can deal with those lower pitches or that stronger vibration. So we're using our strongest, highest performing system, which is our independent ReductoClip system. So what we're going to do to start with is first of all removing the coving and the skirting, so we've got a nice flush wall. We're going to leave around a 10mm gap in front of the wall and then build a stud frame. And this is where it diverts a little bit from our last video about our direct-to-wall ReductoClip system. So a little gap and then a stud frame. We've got our 50mm timber to build a stud, and around the perimeter of the stud we're going to isolate the stud frame using what we call an isolation strip, which is just like this, a big roll of rubber, and that sits underneath the frame, over the top of the frame and down the sides of the frame, so the frame is almost floating in the air and it isolates it from the structure. So that's the first step. Now, one detail we did want to explain quite quickly is that the full independent system takes up 120mm. Now, this sounds like a lot of space, and one common comment that we get from people is they don't want to lose that much space in the room, when actually in a lot of properties 120mm really isn't that much. Now, 120mm is roughly the size of your average fizzy drinks can. So we put this can against the wall on its side. That is roughly how much space the system takes up. And as you can see, in comparison to the depth of the chimney breast, it's not even half. It's about a third of the depth of the chimney breast. So for the highest performing system that's going to give you the absolute best results, it really isn't that much space to lose at all. So we're going to stop at this point just so I can explain or answer a couple of frequently asked questions that we get a lot. First of all, in this instance, we're installing in a room that's got a hard wood floor. In a lot of cases, people will have a carpet, so we get asked what do you do with your carpet? In which case, before you start installing any of the system or building the stud frame, what you want to do is peel the carpet back to give yourself a bit of space. Your carpet will be pinned down on carpet gripper rods. So you just want to get the corner, peel it back, roll the carpet and underlay back about 1 meter, unscrew your gripper rods and remove them. Build your stud frame, do the full installation of the entire soundproofing, and once it's finished, screw your gripper rods back down, roll your carpet back and just trim off the excess carpet that you no longer need. So you don't want to build it on top of the carpet, roll it back, install, and then put your carpet back in place. Now, to give you a little bit of science about the system and how it works and why it works, the reason why in this case we're doing an independent system is because sound is basically an energy. It's a vibration energy. And vibration travels very easily through the contact of solid materials. So if we put heavy, dense soundproofing materials just straight onto the wall, it's never going to be as effective because the vibration just travels from the wall into the layers. So what we're doing here is we're separating the soundproofing from the party wall. We do that by building the stud frame away from the party wall by at least 10 millimeters. Further away if you can, if you've got the space, but at least 10 millimeters. So we're using some packers around the sides and around the back just to keep the stud wall away from the party wall, and then we can take the packers out when we're done. We also put an isolation strip around the perimeter of the entire frame. Now this isolation strip is made of a rubber that can absorb vibration, and by separating the wood of the stud from your floor and your ceiling and your walls, it's going to allow the stud to absorb a little bit more of that energy and vibration and give you a better result. We also get asked quite a lot about where to fix the stud frame. Now, it does depend in each situation what you've got to fix to, but in most cases like this with an alcove, all you're going to do is put a couple of fixings straight down through the bottom of the stud, through the isolation strip and down into the floor, through the top, again through your studs, through the isolation strip and up into your ceiling joists. And you can, for a bit of extra support, also fix through sideways, through the stud, through the isolation strip and into your solid walls at the side. And that gives the stud frame lots of structural strength. So it's not going to wobble, it's not going to move anywhere. It means there's still a little bit of connection between the stud and the house, but only the very small surface area of a screw, not the whole surface area of the stud. Next thing to explain is the plug socket. A lot of people ask about how can I bring the socket forward by 120 millimeters as the soundproofing brings the wall forward. Now sometimes you'll have enough excess cable just to unscrew the socket and pull it forward, but in a lot of cases there won't be. So as you'll see here, what we've done is chased into the wall so we can actually pull out the cable that's traveling up the wall, which gives us a bit more allowance to come further forward. So the socket will sit further up the wall, a little bit higher, but we'll have the excess cable to come further forward and sit flush with the front of the soundproofing. Another thing that I wanted to touch on at this point is a couple of the preliminary things that you need to address with the house before you start doing the soundproofing. And that is that a lot of properties will have coving at the top of the ceiling, and most properties will also have skirting boards down at the bottom of the wall. Now these do need to be removed. The reason why is because if you only soundproof from the skirting to the coving, the sound is still going to come through that part of the wall. So we need to cover the entire wall. And also because of the way that they slant, it's going to mean if we were to build in front of the coving, you'd lose a lot more space. So the easiest thing to do is just remove it. So what we're doing is we're measuring out where the front of the soundproofing is going to finish, which in this case with this system is 120 mil. Make a little mark. We're going to cut the coving, use a crowbar to prise it off. In a lot of cases you can prise it off in one and reinstall it later. With very old properties with old original coving, it may not. It may break up and it might have to be replaced. But you can certainly try and take it off and reuse it. Same with the skirting. Down here we've marked out 120 mil from the back of the wall, cut it, prise it off, move it out the way, install the system now up to the front of the to where we've cut the skirting board, and at the end, once all the soundproofing is installed, put a new skirting and a new coving back on the front of the soundproofing. Now, in regards to building your stud frame, we generally recommend to build your vertical studs at 600 mil centers. Now, 600 mil centers, for those that don't know, means the measurement from the center of one stud to the center of the next stud is 600 mil, which means the gap in between will actually be about 550 millimeters. The reason we do that is because the mineral wool that we're about to put in is 600 mil wide. We want it to be a little bit wider than the space between the studs because it holds itself in there by friction. That's one question we get a lot. How do we fix the mineral wool in place? Does it need to be glued in or mesh put in? No, you don't. High density mineral wool, unlike things like fiberglass, it holds its shape very well because it's a lot more dense. So by creating a gap that's just ever so slightly smaller than the width of the mineral wool, you can just give it a little squeeze, push it between the studs and let go, and it will just hold itself there. So it's very quick, very easy. So 600mm centers, and then that also is a good position for the clips, because the next stage is screwing our ReductoClips, which are at 1200mm centers. So 600mm studs gives us a nice position to fix our clips. Okay, so we've got our stud frame up and in position, so that's ready for the clips to start being fixed to. But first, what we now need to do is insulate the stud frame itself. We're going to do that with a high density acoustic mineral wool. And at this point, I just want to explain why we do that, because a lot of people misunderstand the purpose of the mineral wool. Now, insulation in the stud frame isn't actually the soundproofing itself. It's not there to block sound. The reason we put insulation in the frame is because once we plasterboard in front of it, it's going to create a hollow chamber. And when sound gets into a hollow chamber, it bounces around in there and echoes. And when sound echoes, it amplifies. It's what we call the drum effect. It's the same way a drum or an acoustic guitar works. So by putting a high density insulation inside of the stud frame, when the sound gets inside, it's not going to be able to bounce around because it's going to get soaked up and absorbed by the insulation. So it's not blocking the original sound, but it's stopping the fact that we're creating a hollow cavity from amplifying the sound. So that's very, very important. Don't just leave a hollow cavity behind your soundproofing, it'll make things worse. So now we've built the stud, insulation in, and then we're going to start installing our ReductoClips. So the mineral wool is now in, we're fully insulated. The next step is now to install the ReductoClips. And this is a ReductoClip. The idea behind this is that, as I said earlier, sound is an energy, it's a vibration, so we want to absorb it. So the more flexible the wall is, the more ability it has to move, it's going to absorb that energy and that vibration. It's the same science basically as how the suspension springs in your car work. If you didn't have the springs in your car, it's completely rigid, you drove over a pothole, it'd feel really, really awful. But because your car's flexible, when you drive over the pothole, you don't feel it, you get a nice comfy journey. So that's the idea behind these. So we screw the ReductoClips onto the timber frame, all over the wall. Then we can run what we call fairing channels, which are long metal strips, and they clip into the ReductoClips. A couple of the benefits of the ReductoClip system, as opposed to some of the other isolation clip systems on the market, is the main thing is it's the slimmest. So in domestic premises where you're trying to limit the amount of space that you're going to lose, this is the slimmest on the market. The clip itself and the fairing channel that clips into it is a total thickness of just 25mm, which is very, very slim. It's roughly half the size of a lot of other systems on the market. So you're really limiting the amount of space loss while still having very, very high performance. We use this system in things like recording studios, home cinemas, so it has a very, very high performance. Another benefit is that the fairing channel that clips into the ReductoClip is much wider than all the other systems on the market. It's a 50mm wide fixing plate on the fairing channel as opposed to 30mm, so much easier to screw your plasterboards onto, makes installation a lot quicker and a lot easier. The final benefit is this has a dual isolation. So the main thing is this green washer is what's actually supporting the weight of your mass, the weight of all your plasterboards, and that separates the plasterboards from the stud frame, and that's what gives it its resilience and ability to absorb that energy. But on the back, it also has this high density acoustic foam which separates the clip from the wall and allows it a little bit of flex backwards and forwards, so it gives us an exceptional performance. So the ReductoClips and fairing channels are now on. They are fully installed, and you can see the fairing channels now clipped into the ReductoClips, running horizontally across the alcove. This now allows us to screw our plasterboards on to start adding that mass and covering up the wall. But just wanted to quickly explain the spacings of the clips, because some people do get a bit confused with that. So horizontally, going across the fairing channel, the Reducto clips can be installed up to 1200 millimeters apart, or 1.2 meters. You can install them closer together, but 1200 mil apart at maximum. So if your alcove was 1200 or less, we would just do one row of clips down one side, one row of clips down the other side. In this case, the alcove is slightly bigger. It starts at about 1300 down at the bottom and gets a little bit wider at the top. So we're going with 3 rows of clips, so they're a lot closer together. So one down the center as well in this case. Now, traveling up the wall, the clips should be no further apart than 600 mil. So the center of these bars should be no greater than 600 millimeters. Again, they can be closer together depending on the size of your wall, but no greater than 600. So for this wall, which goes up to about 2.5 meters, we can do it in 5 rows of clips, 5 rows of fairing channels. One thing I wanted to mention quickly, although we've not had to do it in this instance, but it's worth mentioning, is that if your wall is very long, so instead of just small alcoves, you're doing a whole flat wall, what you may find is your wall is a lot longer than the fairing channels. So these come at 2.4 meter lengths. So if your wall is, say, 3 meters wide, you're going to need to overlap the fairing channels. Now that's very easy. You don't need to use any more clips, any extra clips. It's just a case of 2 fairing channels would overlap by 150 millimeters with a self-tapping screw either side of the overlap, so it's nice and secure. So if you've got a long wall, it doesn't matter, you just overlap the channels, but for shorter than 2.4, you can just use one single fairing channel. So a top tip for you, after you've installed your clips and your bars and you put your first layer of plasterboard on, what's going to happen is that first layer of plasterboard is going to cover the location of your bars. So when you come to install your second layer of plasterboard, you're not going to know where your fairing channels are. So top tip, so you know exactly where they are for when you do your second layer, just to get a pencil that you can easily rub off again and just make a little marking on the sidewall. So a little marking around the location of the center of the bar for each row. And then once you put on your second layer, you can just rub those markings off again. Now, I very quickly wanted to just show you about the sockets. Obviously, a lot of people will have plug sockets on their party wall, and that can be a bit of a problem or something to need to work around. So a couple of different options for you. Now, on Alan's original wall, he had a very typical recessed style socket. So there's basically a little metal box that sits inside of the wall, and then this face that sits on the front, and that's where your wiring goes. Now the problem with that kind of socket is if it sits inside of the wall, we would basically have to cut a great big hole out of the soundproofing to put the socket inside. And that now creates a weakness because your socket's got a lot less mass than the rest of the wall. So one option is to do that if you really like the look of having nice flush recessed sockets, but on the inside of your socket box, you insert an acoustic putty pad. Now this is basically an intumescent putty that's moldable. You peel this back, you insert it inside the socket box and mold it around. Now that doesn't solve the problem, but it just minimizes how much of a problem it is. But a better solution is to change the type of socket. So instead of a recessed flush socket, use a surface mounted socket. It has a nice looking plastic box. So instead, all you need to do is cut a hole, pull your cables through. We'll now seal that hole up with some acoustic sealant and then rewire this actually on the front of the wall. So it actually sits on top of the wall, not inside of the wall. We get to keep much more mass in this area, so you're going to get much better results. So as you can see, first layer of plasterboard is now up and we're fully covered. One thing I wanted to mention quickly is that these plasterboards, they're not just standard domestic style plasterboard. This is what we call acoustic grade plasterboard. You normally know it's acoustic if it's got this blue backing paper on. The difference basically being that acoustic grade plasterboard is much heavier. So airborne sound is blocked by mass. The heavier, the more dense the material is,
the harder it is for the sound to actually pass through it. So we want to add as much weight and as much mass to the wall as we can. So these boards being thicker and denser and heavier than standard plasterboard is going to block a lot more sound. And we're going to do one layer of acoustic plasterboard, then we're going to add a material called Tecsound onto that, which is a different type of material, and then we're going to finish with another layer of acoustic grade plasterboard. So altogether there's a lot of weight, a lot of density there. So this material down here, which we're putting on next, is called Tecsound. There's a few different versions of Tecsound, but this is the SY100, which is the thickest, heaviest, and it's also self-adhesive. So it's very easy to install. It's very, very sticky, self-adhesive on the back with the paper. So you just peel off the backing paper and stick it onto your wall. And the idea behind this material is that although it's relatively thin, the SY100 is only 5mm thick, so it's very, very thin material, but it's incredibly heavy. It weighs almost as much as lead. This is about 10 kilograms per meter square, so not much lighter than this full 15mm acoustic plasterboard, but it's only 5mm thick. So we're going to cut that up, stick it onto the wall, and then we'll be ready for the plasterboard after that. So as you can see, we've now got the Tecsound on the wall. That's now completely covering the wall, ready for the last layer. Top tip with the Tecsound, our installers today are very experienced, so they pretty much whacked it on in one roll. But if it's the first time you've done it, you're struggling with the weight, or you've not got much help, you can cut it into smaller pieces and patch it on in pieces if that's easier for you. But obviously the less pieces and the less seams that you get on there, the better ideally. But you can cut it up if needs be. So the final layer of board is on. Couple of things to note is when the plasterboard's being installed, you do have to leave a 5mm perimeter gap all the way around the edge of the wall. So that's 5mm up each side between the plasterboard and these two side walls, a 5mm gap at the bottom off the floor, and a 5mm gap from the ceiling. The idea with that is now when it's all installed, the wall's still got its ability to move and flex. If the plasterboards are butting right up against the surrounding surfaces, it becomes rigid, so it's not going to be as effective at absorbing that energy and vibration of the sound. Once it's all fully installed, we then seal that 5mm gap with an acoustic sealant. So you run a bead of sealant all the way around, fill in that 5mm gap and smooth it all off. So it's basically ready to be skimmed and plastered. Where we've got our cables coming through for the socket, again, a bit of acoustic sealant in there, so it's all sealed up and airtight, and it's ready now for the surface mounted socket to go on top. So we are back at Home Fair, a week on from the installation of our ReductoClip system. And yeah, nice to see everything's all done. The coving is back on the ceiling, the skirting's back on down by the floor. The whole system is now basically ready just for a local plasterer to come out, do a quick plaster skim, so the wall is kind of back to normal. No one would know that there was any soundproof in there. It's just going to be blocking a lot more sound, but looking like a normal wall. We've had a good listen today. We've had people go next door, have a conversation, raise their voices, run up and down the stairs, and the difference between today and last time is huge. Not 100% silent, because we do still have little weaknesses such as behind the chimney breast, but it's made a huge difference. Sound that before was coming through very loud, very clear, very audible, is now very low, very muffled, if heard at all. So day to day, for normal household level kind of conversation and things, it's made a huge difference. One thing to note as well, for those who are a bit worried about space loss, is the customers managed to get a TV unit and a TV back in the alcove, chest of kind of cupboards in there, so you've still got very usable space in the alcoves. It's not brought the whole thing forward by too much at all. So generally very happy. It's made a big difference. It's going to make that customer very happy. For those wanting to know about costs, to completely soundproof the 2 alcoves, all the materials for both sides, including VAT, delivery, came to about £800. So not a ridiculous amount of money to spend on something that's so life-changing. If you're interested in soundproofing your own home, if you've got noisy neighbours, whether it's your walls, whether it's floors, whether it's ceilings, please give us a call or visit our website www.soundproofingstore.co.uk. Give us a call, speak to experts, and we can tell you exactly what you need to do and supply everything.